Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Matutine broadcast conversations. I'm kind of bringing these back in a different, the same thing, different iteration of an earlier project. And so the purpose of these conversations is really about exploring conscious creative leadership, thriving in disruption, and really examining as we raise awareness what a new paradigm means, what we're able to achieve and what's possible individually and as a collective as we go through a paradigm shift and as consciousness continues to rise. And so in these conversations, I have wonderful friends and guides and individuals who are very dedicated to this path as individuals and in the work that they do. And we'll be exploring together what these concepts mean. And I look forward to hearing from you what they mean and what your thoughts are. And I think that, we all have these ideas and we can connect to these higher concepts. But our question still remains, and I see it all the time, is, but what does it look like? What does it really look like as we go through these shifts, and really what is possible, and what are we creating today that's part of a new paradigm or that's moving us in that direction, and what are we creating today that maybe is not that we need to be more aware of, and how can we have more open conversations in on this topic. And so to get us started, I have my wonderful friend Breean, who is joining us. And you can learn a ton about Breean in the links below. She does wonderful work on higher self leadership, right, Bree? Yes. And has ceremonies and dance playlists, getting into your body awareness, leadership and mentoring, and a podcast that she recently started. And so you can connect with Bree below. And the reason that I have Bree joining me for these dialogues is because she's one of my favorite souls to connect with on what systems are, individual systems, how we organize, and why systems exist and what higher levels of systems are. And so, Bree and I just like to create, and we like to explore and evaluate different ideas. And so that's pretty much what we'll be doing together in this conversation series. And we hope that you'll enjoy, join us and put in the comments and links and suggestions and your ideas, because that's how innovation happens, is that we connect and we share as much as possible. And all of a sudden new things start to emerge. So Bree.
Carley, you're one of the only humans probably on the planet that I could count as one of those people who I could get into a 7-hour-long car ride with. And at the end, we would say, dang, that went fast. And we didn't get to even talk about all the things we wanted to talk about. So looking forward to our conversations as always.
Yes, we'll try to keep them to less than 7 hours.
Yeah, I think we can do better than that for the people listening. But yeah, you're one of my long phone call friends.
Yes. Yes, and I always appreciate it. And that's, but that's where we discover. That's how we discover, when we're so used to conversations that are short and superficial and get to the point, get to the bottom line. We miss out on so much depth and discovery, in our own journey, and really reflecting on and sharing that reflection, that co-creative process of discovering together. And in order to do that, it needs time.
Yeah.
Time and attention. Yeah. And that is something that is certainly old paradigm missing. Somehow these conversations keep getting shorter and shorter and shorter.
Yeah. Well, I think we're so stuck in the monotony of the stuff that we're going through on a daily basis that oftentimes we can get into conversations and just focus on those things. Like we have to update each other on all of the tiny excruciating details of what's happened in our day-to-day lives instead of actually creating something new with the conversation. It's just a habit to watch, I think. So are your conversations focused on things that already happened and you're like updating people, or to a version of you that doesn't even exist anymore because here you are in the now moment, or are you using your conversations to be like, here's where I am now and let's create something together?
Exactly.
I like that second type a lot better. It
I
always feels so much better too.
I definitely do too. And I think the truth is too that most of us, when given that space, when we can have that connection with another, or with with whatever environment, we all prefer that. It's just that we're so, as you're saying, we're not used to that being the standard. And so here we get to do that, and we get to share that. So thank you. And to get us started on this first journey, let's kind of broadly take a look at. I would love for us to first ask the question: what is a paradigm shift for you? What does that really mean? And maybe what has an experience been for you when you go through a paradigm shift?
I mean, I guess if I had to put some definition around it in the simplest term, it would be seeing things differently, and therefore the ability to do things differently and be things differently. That fundamental seeing things through the perception of the mind differently, I think, is where it's rooted for me. I don't know. Do you want to throw yours in and then we can talk about what we think the new paradigm is that is emerging? Yeah. Or do you want me to expand yet? Or should we just dabble in this area for a bit? Let's dwell here.
Dabble here. I'll just kind of add, I completely agree from the when we really look at the simplicity of the concept, right? A paradigm shift, it allows perception to change, right? When our paradigm shifts, we perceive completely differently, depending on how big that paradigm shift is. And I think what is powerful for myself when I look at what paradigm means, and for my own experience, and what I notice within the collective, and especially now what we're going through in a paradigm shift, which will be highly disruptive. And the reason why that is because the framework of our entire sense-making machine, our entire system, mind system, right? So our ego construction, our mind system as an individual, and then as a collective. All of a sudden, everything has been hanging on a particular frame, right? So we've been researching through this perception, through this lens, gathering all of our facts to fit it onto whatever our paradigm is. All of our hypotheses, all of our working theories, everything is based off of, is looking at this frame. And when the paradigm shifts, it means that none of that information is correct, or the bits and pieces might be, right? Like, well, that could still be, there's something in that. Doesn't mean everything gets thrown out.
Sure.
But the frame that holds it is no longer relevant, or it is proven false. So we see this a lot, like in the scientific community. It's one of my biggest questions as a scientist myself, as all of us are explorers of truth and information and what exists, that when we have an entire framework that has had the lens this big, and all of a sudden something breaks that, all of our theories fall apart. And this is the awakening, right? The awakening that happens internally is that internal paradigm, that ego, that self that was created goes.
Yeah, sure does. Or sometimes the self goes And then that's where the paradigm shift happens.
Yes. Yeah.
I really like to think about this collective shared reality that we're all in as a series of agreements that we've all made.
Yes.
Some agreements we have deliberately, explicitly chosen ourselves and opted into. Some agreements have been made on behalf of us without our full opt-in or opt-out. Many of those we're just letting sit there and not doing anything to disrupt. So there are different levels of agreements here, but ultimately, like there is not a rule maker here on Earth, actually, that is the be all end all owner of the way things should be done here. We have no idea what we're actually doing. We pretend that we do. We pretend that some people do, and we've allowed them to make decisions and come to agreements about how things should be here. And then largely by acquiescence, we just allow those agreements to kind of be what we've default opted in without actually making those decisions ourselves. It's just the way things are, the way things are done here. And I think it was Matthias de Stefano. I feel like I was listening to him on a podcast recently talk about the difference between, or like he was discerning what the concept of morals are.
Yes.
Have you heard this conversation?
I have.
Maybe like him do it some other place or something. But what struck me from how he explained morals is that, we have like ancestries and lineages and heritages and all of these things. We have ethics. We have, systems of what's right and wrong, all of that. But we also have these regional based, it seems like, or culturally based sets of morals, and the morals are not actually rooted in right or wrong or good or bad, whatever that means. There is no like justified measurement of those things. The morals in summary are just, this is how we do things here. Here we get married at this age and do it this way, and you have this many children, and this is what is moral and good here. This is how we do things here. And people make these agreements willing or kind of just by, again, just like letting it happen and showing up and saying, okay, I'm not okay with this. And that's where we get to. And then like over thousands of years, it's like, where did this even come from? This ideal, this moral, this agreement that somehow someone made in the past that is shaping how I'm living my present reality. And that's where I feel like we have this change that's happening. It's that these things are outdated. These agreements that have been made no longer make sense. And the ways that we're doing things, the morals that we're living by in society, no longer work for us. I don't know if they ever did work, but they're certainly not working now with how rapidly things are changing. And I think people are really starting to have their like cognitive dissonance shattered. And they're starting to come more awake to the fact that it's not a personal failing that they're struggling. It's not a personal moral failing that they feel unfulfilled and totally stressed out, and their nervous system is totally dysregulated, and they're addicted to the phone dopamine lottery, and on and on and on, and it's hard to find healthy food. Like all of these agreements that have been made on our behalf from hundreds of years ago or 50 years ago or from the 1970s mostly are like shaping this reality. And I think we're starting to say, hey, I no longer agree with this. I don't agree with this. So I feel like a big thing that's shifting and what will allow a new paradigm to emerge is that more people are going to not only recognize, I don't like this, this doesn't work for me, but this doesn't seem to work for anybody. And I don't agree with this. How do I raise that issue? Where do I raise that issue?
Yeah.
How do I, now that I know I definitely don't agree with this, and it seems like no one else does, what right action can we take to resolve that issue? And that's where I think we're seeing like a lot of things just not work anymore and people not buy into them anymore.
Yes. Yes.
Yeah.
You know, what you brought up too, this in this awakening process, which is a process, not an endpoint, it's just expansion, it's just consciousness expanding. And so as this occurs, I wanted to take a moment to speak to morality, because it's a really, really important topic to sink into and understand its origins, where it has pretended to serve, where it should sort of serve, and where, and so because it is very much, for me, it's related to this concept of what you're speaking to, which is the sort of, let's call it an imposed system, a non-organic system, that something was created and certain narratives, a mental system that doesn't favor, right? But then we also have the idea of these higher systems. And there is, when I was first going through a lot of my empowerment process, I went through a moment where I was like, there is no good or evil, right? Like within myself, like within this, I was like, oh my God, this shame, this guilt, like all of this stuff is just so incorrect. Now, that said, I was running into but because then I would also see and have this expansion that was like, oh, well, I can do whatever I want, right? No consequences. And we'll see this within certain, we'll see this and it's not about judging. It's just simply, wait, something is still missing within this dialogue. Because there are laws that are not, that don't have a human, element of morality or scolding or guilt or any of these things. But when we defy higher systems, organic systems of regeneration, what allows individual consciousness and collective consciousness to thrive in the direction of health, of life, that there are two directions, and that there is a healthy and an unhealthy, and there is balanced. And so I find it, I think it's fascinating, right? That where you went right away was into morality and what you were listening to and how this was related. And of course, the imposed system, the inorganic conversation, or you could say more manipulative conversation, that has kind of like screwed with us because it inverts, or it confuses us on these topics that inherently, if I really asked myself, right, like, is it higher consciousness and healthy to, well, I'm sorry, I'm just going to go to something that's a little bit more obvious, right? To traumatize, to deeply harm a child. Okay. So if I'm in there are no morals, I can do whatever I want. I feel like doing this, so I'm going to do it. Fine. Make your decision. The karma thing. I think there is a system for that as well, but there's a conversation there. And I also think that most individuals, when they really ask their heart, that without morality, without having a scolding or a bad conversation, you connect to that and go, there's something inherently unhealthy about this.
Yeah.
And so I'll just pause there. And so we can continue, because it was just such a perfect entry point.
Yes. Okay. So here I think is just like such a fundamental truth from my perspective, and from where I'm sitting, take it or leave it if it resonates with you, that any concept, anything that's done, anything that exists could be good or bad, used in an unhealthy or healthy way. Like everything exists on that spectrum. What changes it or brings it more into the light or toward love is the underlying consciousness.
Yes.
And the orientation of the people taking the action or saying the words or performing the deed. So things like hierarchy can be really useful for organizing, and they can be really destructive and rigid and dominating and suppressing. So what really matters to the system, the structure, the deed, the action, whatever it is, the tool, like the internet, for example, is the orientation from which we are working with it or living with it or creating with it. And that, I think, is where we're getting into more of like a paradigm shift around the mind system that you're talking about, Carley, which I, could talk ceaselessly about, about how we are uniquely, I like to think of us as two beings in one. Do you mind if I just like riff for a second?
Of course.
Okay. I like to think of humans. We get to uniquely be kind of two beings in one. There is this human being that exists, and it has a physical body, and it's rooted on this Earth planet, and it has an operating system that it comes with. Like, full stop. It has an operating system programmed into every freaking cell of its existence that has been deliberately created and evolved and just emerged over millennia. And here it is. Then we have this higher self being, the soul, the monad, whatever you want to call it. That spirit just comes into this human being body. Now, what I think I see a lot of in the world that's driven very much by the fear consciousness is that the human being, that part of this whole entity, is in charge. And the higher self, the soul, the spirit is kind of just like along for the ride in this process. And it may do its damnedest job to point and nudge and suggest and sweetly just offer to the human being alternatives, opportunities, synchronicities, messages, new people that it, could nourish it. But the human being is mostly focused like self-preservation, survival, keep alive, hoard acorns, protect myself, protect my own, protect my family, me. This lifetime is all there is. I have to procreate. This is what the human being's focused on. What I think and believe very firmly in my own experience, and I feel like I'm witnessing in the world, is that a lot more human beings are evolving with the help of their higher self being. The human being has needs and wants. They have desires. They want to have sex, and they want to eat lots of yummy things, and they want money, and they want to have power and dominance and, survive and win and have the ladies and, like all of those things. The higher self has, I wouldn't even call it an agenda. The higher self has a purpose or an intention that it's anchored to. So like the human being has an agenda. It wants certain things. It wants certain outcomes. It wants to control its reality. And the higher self is a lot more gentle in its being in terms of what it's here for. And so we oftentimes can like easily ignore it or not even know that it's there because it's quiet and it's gentle and it's soft. But if we can work with our human being, our operating system, and not allow it to run the show, not have it be the default over time, we open up to a greater purpose or intention to live from with this higher self that allows so many unique gifts to emerge, allows us to see ourselves and have some perspective on this life and the world that we're living in and the systems, allows us to actually live from a state of love. And then I think we have like this shift happening where our systems they don't have to necessarily explode or burn to the ground, because the people showing up inside of them are different than before. So I can't even remember where I started. This is where I'm ending up. So I'll stop now and let you play off of that, because I went on a total riff there. Had a great time doing it. Now, what do you think, Carley? What's coming up for you around that?
We'll keep going with that. I think that's what is particularly interesting in the human self, higher self, awareness and concept. So there are many theories around why these things exist as they do, many different levels and dimensions of understanding even those theories.
Yep.
And so I'll just, I'll share a little bit. I'll just share kind of more just personally for myself, also kind of how I relate to that and that information. And so we had our time, and there will be more time for people, right? If we look at human experience as human experience, the choice to experience being within a certain density of human. So the choice to forget, the choice to live in the tension between realms, to understand fear, what it is, why it matters, when it serves, when it does not, to experience the beauty that is, I'm looking out my wonderful window at the trees and bushes, the beauty that is the natural world, reflected back in a way that my senses can get excited by, right? Like I can feel and smell and taste. Like human experience is incredible. It is an amazing, it is a gift. When we are disconnected from the higher self or from the perception, the remembering that this is an experience, when we, whether it be intentionally or unintentionally from systems that be, get hijacked by certain narratives and mind programs that really want you to forget that. And to a certain degree that we've created that as well, right? It's kind of like we create our own hell. We create our own heaven. We create our own hell.
Yes.
And we continue to contribute to it. We continue to say, well, there's nothing I can do. Well, I'm going to put my feet up. Well, this is what you got to do in order to get to the top. Well, can't tell you. That's just the way it is. Well, I could go on and on. I've heard it so many times.
Oh yeah.
And I've have found myself at different points in my own journey and in my own consciousness having a similar response, right? When I hear a certain possibility or whatever it is, my perception fights back, my ego fights back, my mind fights back, because it doesn't want to take responsibility for this perception of reality.
Yeah.
So it doesn't want to change. It certainly doesn't want to be uncomfortable. And as getting back to what we were talking about earlier on in the conversation, it's so busy in its movement and its momentum and its paradigm that it's created, that whether it's a prison or a hell is irrelevant. I would rather just keep going and welcome to the gift of the paradigm shift and disruption, right? And this moment in time. So again, the human experience for me, I feel We will all make our different choices. We will continue to do so. I have no idea how exactly these things are going to transpire. There are many different possibilities. So what I do know and feel very deeply connected to within myself is that there has been a time, a rhythm, a time frame of really indulging and understanding the human experience. And that time is there's a moment now that has been in the now where we are changing. And how we want to experience being human from both a biological perspective and a mental perspective and everything else is going to drastically change.
Mm-hmm.
And we'll make different choices. There are different paths to take in this change. But I guess, when it comes back to when we talk about the higher self, right? The higher self has been all along like, okay, I'm glad you're having fun. Yep. Are you learning what you need to learn? Good. Yeah. Oh, you did that. Okay, that's good. Did you don't, hello. You're going a little too far. Wait, pull it back up.
It's like, do you remember the cartoons? Was it Mr. Magoo that was always just like this blind man just like walking off the ledges of buildings? Yes. And then at like the last second, there would be something underneath that would catch him. Like, yes. I feel that's the higher self. Like, we're just all blind, Mr. Magoo. We're just like stumbling around, totally unaware. And there's like this higher self coming in, like lifting us up under it with an umbrella, or like a barge comes underneath the bridge and gets you. And that's what I'm picturing right now as you were.
It's exactly what it feels like. And I think, what's so amazing at this time is that I find that so many people are, whether or not there's awareness of what is happening completely yet, as you were saying, there's an impatience or a recognition, right? The recognition of the fact that the old paradigm is not serving anymore.
Yeah.
And I think that is being seen. Now, we have many different perspectives on why that is, what is coming to light, what our stances are around we all have very different ideas of what that recognition is, but we are recognizing that something isn't working anymore.
Yeah.
And that we are being called from something to reflect deeper on this moment in time and what is possible at this moment in time and who we are and what we want, and whether or not our beliefs are our own or something that has just simply been adopted and agreed to without any consciousness.
Yeah.
And most importantly, what will be coming up, and we'll get into later, we won't get into because I think we're already good, but what we do about it, because I think I see a lot of people seeing, and that's the purpose of these conversations, though, is that it's like, oh, okay, I see, and I want to make some changes within myself, but hold on, I'm still within this construct and this system. And so how do I balance this weird in between?
Yeah.
If I'm at peace with everything, so nothing really has to change, but I'm also like, I kind of want to do things differently.
Yeah.
And I feel like there's some blocks to doing that.
Yeah. I feel like if I could remember back when I was maybe in my earlier 20s, and, I was definitely fully charging forward to try to achieve all the external success.
Mm-hmm.
But at the same time, I had this capacity for seeing things very differently, always saying like, oh, there's a better way to do this. There's a better way to do that. But the only reason I could say that with confidence was because I could see an alternative at the end of the road. And what I recognized then was that I was always feeling very frustrated because I could see this alternative. No one else could see it with me. No one else could understand it when I tried to explain it because they were so focused on seeing what already was. No one could kind of like shape or invent this new version of things with me. And I was always just very frustrated. And, it led to me feeling like very isolated and cynical about everything. And then fast forward to being more in my 30s, understanding more about myself and the mind and the human being and all these things. There was a point, and I can't remember exactly when it was, but I recognized that I wasn't here to see the new thing happen. I was here to be part of the bridge to the new thing, which is in some ways really important work and very exciting in its own right. And in other ways, it's a little bit devastating because you don't get to see the end, at least in this lifetime, of what's possible. You're in the slog of doing it and creating it and reshaping it. And that messy middle is like a giant death and rebirth cycle. And that, I think, is what we're seeing right now. We are, I don't know about in the beginning. I feel like we're definitely in, like we're post the beginning, but it's not quite sped up enough to be a full death cycle yet. But I feel like we're in the throes of it.
Yeah.
Our systems are going offline. The things that we took for granted as being a certain way, like that we've experienced the world, like simply going into the grocery store and the shelves aren't stocked, for example, or showing up to any kind of business these days and it's not open because they can't staff people, for example, and they've just had to shut down early that day or whatever it is. Like small things like this that are signals to the way we've been doing things is ending. I think that's really starting. And then we're seeing big examples too, like what's happening in China and Peru and other places on the planet, the war we're having with Russia and Ukraine. Like there are a lot of big happenings also that are beating the drum of this death cycle of the old way of things.
Yes.
And it feels like the dying gasps and the grasping of the old way coming out. I feel like we're seeing a lot of that right now. And I love to be optimistic about this, but I'm also a person that's comfortable in the darkness. I think it's going to get a lot heavier before it gets lighter.
Mm-hmm.
And for people that are listening, I don't think that's a scary thing. I think that's what we signed up for. I firmly believe we all signed up to be here right now for this.
Yes.
So embrace it and take up your own part in it.
Yes. Yes. Exactly. Exactly. Yeah, I couldn't agree more. And the death cycle, avoidance of and a negative perception of a death cycle is what has been in the way of our expansion all this time. And we see it reflected in all systems, natural systems around us.
Mm-hmm.
Right? The miracle and the truth of life, you don't have to look that far or come up with crazy theories. You just observe what is right in front of you and what is your own body and it gets us back again to this idea of working with systems and surfing the waves and embracing what is brilliant, which is trillions of years, if we even want to look at time, but these natural organic systems, a planet and life and all of the life that can breathe and the awareness that humans are to observe that life. Like this is it's mind-blowing to me that we ever can think, one, that it's not like this miracle, and two, that we would ever question what evolution has brought this about. That it's like, why would I for a moment think that I know better than something that created a planet? And I'm not talking about whatever your perspective is. If we look at quantum universe, what frequencies, what time, what systems, what codes, what structure within a structure, within a structure, within a structure, within a structure had to be created in order for us to take this breath and be able to have this conversation and see each other and communicate, in this way. Like, this is, so death is a part of that. The concept of death, or the death of a body, an ending, because it's not an ending. It is always this transformative process. And part of our immoral, or these other kind of like mental systems that have been like a plague on us for so long, is this resistance to these things that, again, are like, so we are in a death cycle. I agree with you, from a collective, from an ego individual, and there may be physical death, there may not be, but it's like, it doesn't even, our whole understanding of death just has to completely, this is what has to change. The battle against this, and the idea of like, right, like I think about all these, even a story just popped into my head, but it's such a great example of how this is like beaded into our heads constantly. It's like Game of Thrones. I don't know if you've seen that show, right? But like, the ultimate bad guy that they're fighting at the end, and the warriors, and this whole thing that was created, is death. Right? It's like, I loved that show. I loved so much about that show. I really thought there was a lot of wonderful things. And then I got to that ending, and I was like, come on. I guess of course, it's not going to be something that's planting higher consciousness, but still, I'm like, please, somebody do something on this. So yeah, death is a part of a system. Destruction is part of the rebirth.
Yeah.
And what are you thinking as far as what's shifting? And maybe,
well, like within the human and within humans, I think one of the big shifts that's already happening, and I, offer to many to take on if you haven't been already, is a shift away from thinking the mind, like your brain, is actually the decision-making authority and the possessor of all great wisdom and knowledge, and that it knows what's going on and sees reality the correct way, your way. And there's just so much more, like you were saying, like the audacity of the human mind to think that it knows better. It's the human mind, this part that you think is the arbiter of all great decisions in your life. It's not actually what's running the show, just to let you know. And if it is, it's 90% your subconscious that you are not aware of and you are not consciously making decisions with. So if you want to talk about like not being in control, we're all not in control, and we think that we are. And then we project that need for control on everything around us. And that's the audacity I'm talking about, of thinking that we know better, when if we could just actually for a second and look inside of this human operating system that we're in, we would recognize through the entire body, the soma, the energetic body, the being itself, that there's so much more information to access in there. There are different ways to make decisions and to be guided with the right information and the right time for what makes sense to us. And there are so many rhythms and cycles to be attuned to for yourself like individually, you have them. Women have them differently than men. It's like an actual biological thing. I'm not being an asshole here. Like, we have different hormones, we have different cycles that our bodies go through every single 28 to 29 days. It's a real thing, people. But also the cycles of nature that are happening outside of us. And even things like the way that we track time and days with the Gregorian calendar, that's like a man's like accumulation over time of how to control days and months and time that again goes outside of a lot of natural rhythms and cycles. I just feel like we're all trying to control things because we think that we know. I don't know if it's we think we know better, but it's certainly that we want to try to control and make sense and have things feel safe and certain in a reality where that's not possible.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
It's not
It's not limited
possible.
possibilities.
But we want it so badly that we try to control everything. And the way that we do that is to dictate it and to dominate it and make it how we want or how we think it should be. That's how I'm feeling about that, Carley.
Yeah, no, beautiful. And it's a wonderful introduction to, as we start exploring within a new paradigm that emerges from higher consciousness and awareness of these things, what rhythm has been on my mind for the last 3 months. I mean, really, really like forward, like understanding. And I think as our perception of time is shifting, then rhythm becomes the replacement for that perception, right? So instead of the clock or we lose time, this other system of time that was put in place that has all kinds of inversions and weird stuff attached to it. Mm-hmm. And reconnecting with exactly what you're speaking to, which are the natural systems and the cosmic rhythms. And as we become more aware and choose to engage in those rhythms, the body, I mean, it's for years, as you spoke to one system, and there are many people have all kinds of interesting theories about where this system came from for women. But I'm going to go ahead and honor my system for what it is and for my present moment and my present connection to it. And so for years of my life, I was rejecting this part of myself.
Yeah.
And I think it's very common for many women for many reasons. We could say it's one of the downsides of feminine movements being about being masculine, and that we actually ended up oppressing ourselves even further and repressing a connection to our feminine rhythm, which is different. And so I was detached from my own cycle, my own body, my own understanding of these things that were unique about my system, my biological system, which is connected to my spiritual system, which is connected to the system of this planet and the rhythm of this planet and the rhythm of the universe and right, all of these things. And so by disconnecting myself from that, I was in a state of disconnection. The mental narratives and everything and so no matter what I did, I was out of time or I was out of my power, rejecting or trying to control this aspect of myself or make it something that it's not. And since coming into that rhythm within myself, I mean, it's amazing. I feel like I know my body so well now that I can tell when anything is wrong.
Yeah.
You know, I can, whether in any part of my sister, right? But there's a listening and an honoring of what is being communicated and when tension is coming through and whether or not I'm sleeping or taking, right, there's a respect. And this
Yes.
is getting back to that, you know, the higher morality. It's not morality, but it is a respect and an honoring of what regenerative, what higher systems really are, what they mean, and how we can consciously create and become, you know, that there's so many possibilities and so many things that we can create, but not by changing it.
Yeah. When you're talking, Carly, it's just really making me reconnect and remember, like, it's only been a couple of years now, I feel like, but just how like uncomfortable it is to be in a human body, which makes us immediately dissociate from it and disconnect from it or ignore it and repress it, suppress it, instead of facing that discomfort. And I think we're using the body right now as one thing that we're talking about, but I think it's true in a lot of aspects of our lives, not just our physical bodies, that we are never shown, like we never learn, we're never taught or modeled how to move through discomfort in a productive, healthy way.
Mm-mm.
This is true when we're triggered from an emotional standpoint. This is true when we feel something uncomfortable in our body and we don't know what to do with it. It's true in a lot of areas in our lives. Those are the two that are like really coming through for me right now. And I think one of the things that we're really, really, really missing, and honestly, what I feel like I'm here for, like on the planet, is that we're missing skills. There is a huge missing curriculum for humans to learn how to use this and how to work with it and how to work with nature that we are a part of, not apart from. And, you know, like how to actually play in this world. Like, if we imagine ourselves like we are video game avatars, which, you know, if you, depending on how you look at it, we are in some ways, right? In these bodies and this reality, like people spend their lifetimes trying to figure out how to beat certain video games and how to up level in some areas on an actual manufactured video game. Why not take the time and care and devotion to actually figure out how to work with this avatar and find all of the tricks and secrets and learn how to commune with it and perceive the world very differently, handle the discomfort, which from my experience and training, the discomfort is information, it's data. It's just there for you to do something with, not ignore or suppress like it's a bad thing. It's information, people. We are just not skilled at how to use it or work with it. So I feel like this missing curriculum, especially as it relates to the discomfort we feel about being in the human body, is really key as we move into a new paradigm and support people in doing that. Yes. So, you know, when we're in a death cycle, I think one of the drawbacks we've got here is that there's not going to be a lot of support coming your way because it feels like everything is going to stop the bleeding that's happening, right? It's like literally someone's hemorrhaging, you know, from their leg. Let's imagine that. Like I've got a giant gash in my leg and I want to study how to be a better piano player. Which of these things is going to get the attention? The gash in my leg. Totally makes sense. If I don't address that, I can't ever play piano again. Probably. So there's not a ton of support and priority coming to expand your piano playing skills or help you deepen your human skills that most people don't even recognize is missing from the curriculum because we've got a giant gash in our leg as a people and as a world. So I think like seeking out those sources of support, and even people who feel called to be more of service in the bridge of this death cycle, please step up and serve other people and supporting so that we can start to build the skills. Because if we don't build the skills, what's going to emerge out of the death cycle is more of the same shit.
Yes.
Because we're going to have the same consciousness from when we entered it, which means we're just going to repeat the same old nonsense.
Yep. Yes. And what I'll add, it could not agree more from, many different perspectives. And I think it's important when we look at the skills and the learning, why this gap exists, is an important thing that I had to recognize, because I think for a long time, I kind of thought it was an accident.
Yeah.
And I liked thinking it was an accident because it made me feel a lot smarter. I was like, oh, well, it's just that people didn't, the consciousness wasn't there or weren't awake. And like, you'll see. And then I started to recognize that there's a lot of information that was available and a lot of people who know a lot about this.
Yeah.
And it was a specific choice not to empower. And that the only reason that really matters, two main reasons. One is because if we don't see that, then we can kind of get stuck fighting up against a wall and not understand what's blocking us. Because there's a big difference between ignorance from a naivete perspective, blocking, and ignorance from an arrogance and intentful way, blocking. And so we integrate and we bring them both. It's not about blame. It's still ignorant. Right. It's still just low consciousness that just doesn't understand. But understanding the intention and how much is behind that intention is important, because otherwise we just don't know we don't understand what obstacle we keep running up against.
Yes.
And so that, I think, is one reason that it's important to see, recognize it, deal with it, let it go. Don't get obsessed with it. But that is a part. And then, because we've had incredible teachers like Steiner, for example, Rudolf Steiner, with the development of the Waldorf schools and everything that he put out. I mean, his work is phenomenal and was pretty widely available and accessible.
Yeah.
And there were, unfortunately, we took psychologists that could have been working for empowerment and working from a spiritual perspective. And instead, we closed out Jung. We put the crazy people together. We brought in the psychology world. You want to know who runs the world? Psychologists.
And pharma companies.
Well, yes.
Hello.
Definitely. Well, the body
and our food companies, which are actually pharma companies.
Which are actually pharma companies. But again, all of the messaging, the work in psychology is really fascinating, and it went through an acceleration in the last 200 years or so. Yeah. And when you really look at the roots of where that went and why, it's really fascinating to look at. So understanding that block, where it comes from, I think is really important. And then the other thing that I'd say for what you're speaking to, because it's so true, right? Mm-hmm. A kid goes to a Waldorf school where they're learning about their body. They're learning about their heart. They're learning about what they put into their system. They're learning how to build a system from scratch. They're learning geometry through parts and putting things to get right with their body. So Steiner understood the importance of the body's integration.
Yes.
And when you put, for adults, however, so for those of us who did not have that experience, and depending on how long we didn't have that experience and how long we were programmed outside of our instincts, for kids that go into Waldorf, that information unlocks within them like this. And I won't say just Waldorf, but generally speaking, right? If you're nurtured into knowing what to do with that power and your body from a young age, you are magical. at a young age, because it's encouraged and that opening happens.
Yeah.
For those of us who have gone through the adulthood programming, which is very intense, and we have all of our trauma stuff that we never really got to work through, and we got, so there's like, it's okay.
Layers upon layers.
Layers upon layers,
Yeah.
but we can get through it. We can, and
Totally.
that is where the skills gap, I find, at this point, it's those that are in authority, that are adults, that we're the ones that have to retrain. Our kids and the generations that come afterwards, they just need to be nurtured into their own deeper understanding. I mean, it'll unlock so fast.
Yes.
But us, we got some work to do.
We do.
We have a lot of unlearning ahead of the.
We do. It's these concepts of how do we get here and what do we need to know about the goddess here. I think we got here. You could place a blame in any direction. Blame is not helpful. It roots you back into the victim consciousness where you've got no control or responsibility over yourself or sovereignty in the situation, no choices. So we're not going to go there.
Exactly.
But it is important to be honest and to recognize that the agreements that we've made about this reality, to connect back to what we talked about in the beginning, are built upon a couple of giant assumptions around scarcity and a lack of abundance, and this concept of efficiency being really important. And I just really want to reflect that both of those assumptions are completely false, but they underlie the premise of our entire constructs in such a pervasive way that we don't even notice that they're there. So what I'm talking about in terms of scarcity is that we have a perception of false scarcity in this reality when there is actually so much abundance. So one example is time. We've been talking about time. Well, there is actually a huge amount of time for the things that we need. I don't know if you know, but when you practice actually being present, it's almost like time expands and slows down. We have so much more ability to actually be inside of time than we know we do, and to work with it. But yet we've bought into this agreement, willingly or not, that time is money and that we only have such a certain amount of time and that it's a precious resource, which it is in some ways. But we're shown that it's the scarce resource, and it's actually not. It's the way that we've built our systems and we've bought into this way of life that makes it such a scarce resource. Or food, honestly. In the United States, we waste half of all the food that we produce. That's utterly ridiculous when we have so many children literally missing meals again in the same country. And then we want to make claims that we can't have organic, or we can't get away from factory farming or industrial production of food, because how will we feed the world? And it's like, this is insanity. It's actually insane. Yes. It's true insanity. And all of these decisions that we're making about how we feed ourselves and grow food and all these things are so divorced from what is actually real in nature, is so much abundance. If people could grow food in their backyards and share with neighbors, and we could get back to, or move forward into, a new way of operating where we actually see these things in the truth that they are, as being way more abundant than we know, we could have a very different relationship and reality around food and food poverty. That's just one example. There are so many other false scarcities that are created around, like intimacy and connection, for example. We have, with the internet and the way we work and the way we separate ourselves into individual homes, and we don't know our neighbors, we've created this false scarcity of connection and community, when it doesn't need to exist that way. There are so many ways to build community if you're willing. which I'd love to talk to you about in a future conversation.
Oh, yeah.
I have so much to share there too, about the role of community and uniquely how I've lived in this community out here in the middle of Illinois. And then false scarcity is one of the agreements that we've made, we've kind of bought into. And the other, I was writing this down, is this false efficiency.
Yes.
So we have created all of these rigid structures that are in the name of efficiency. We ascribe to things like the calendar and time, like measuring time, like we were talking about, because of we're trying to be efficient, right? Like humans have to meet at a certain time, or everybody has to know what time it is, or whatever these things are. We've changed daylight savings so that farmers have more sunlight, or I don't even remember what the real reason was. Like we make these alterations to our reality in the sake of efficiency. For women with our cycles, like it's not efficient for you to have this cycle every month and still get things done. So just completely ignore that shit and keep pushing through it. You understand what I'm saying here. So there's also this false sense of efficiency. When we try to make every decision in life because we think that we need to create some other efficiency in order to have some outcome, like making more money or getting projects done faster, for crying out loud, whatever that end thing is that we're trying to achieve, that's actually most of the time arbitrary at the end of the day. We're making all these decisions that totally, again, override all of the natural systems, override all the actual information we're getting from our body and the experience, overriding truth and happiness and fulfillment and love and purpose. And we're doing it because we think we complete a project 2 days faster than we would have otherwise, or we don't end up being efficient, because what it does in the long term is it makes you a burnt out person, and then you can't function. Or we have these systems that one tiny thing gets in the way and then the whole system crumbles and we can't get anything delivered. Or like we think we're being efficient by creating these structures outside of natural rhythms. Nature is fucking efficient. If you want to look at efficiency, if you want a model for efficiency, it is all around you at all times.
Exactly.
That one quote that you always get in the tea bag, where it's like it's almost like there's no deadline or pressure, and yet nature gets everything done on time, or something like that. Like that's it. That's the key here, people.
Yeah.
So this false efficiency and false scarcity, I feel like, are really driving everything. And we've got to unlearn these things. It's not that we need to go learn a new thing yet. We need to unravel and unlearn and get under all the layers you were talking about. Yes. So that's a process too. And that's a skill.
Yes. Yes, it is. Yes, it is. And I think the first, this brings us back to the death cycle, because when you ask, right, so similar to you, and I'll look at my early 20s, I was like on a dream, I have all these things now. It's like, liberate yourself from the dream, please. Be in the dream, in the fascination and the presence of the dream, but liberate yourself from this whole achieving of a dream. It is insanity. It is part of what creates this entire cycle. And the thing is, though, when we look at the fear, because it seems, well, why would I fear abundance, right? Why would I fear what you're speaking to in these more organic ways? And we have to really look at why that is, and where the traumas and validation and so much of what we've learned and so much of our self-identity dies when we stop attaching ourselves to these needs. Like my dream for many years was to be an actress, right? And that was, and I really thought that was like in a way, like an empowered sort of, right? I wasn't doing life like in a normal way. I was committed to something completely different. I really loved the craft of what I was doing. The reality, though, of the life of pursuing that dream was making me miserable. Miserable. But I loved the work. I loved acting. And then, and so I'd ask myself, well, why don't I do, why don't I do like what is acting? Being present in life, in the story of life. And the more that I found, what I found is that I was escaping myself, my own experience of life, to be in the adventure of another life. And I learned from that, and it was beautiful. And I still enjoy storytelling, but I can storytell any moment and any day. Nobody takes that away from me. Nobody needs to give me a title or give me a particular way of doing it. And if anything, all the stuff that's attached to it in that way, I find super stressful, if I'm honest with myself, So, but I had to release all of the attachments associated with that, because the idea of not being an actor, or like, well, but then it looks like failure, right? So that the ego starts to freak out.
Yeah, it likes to freak out.
It loves to freak out.
I mean, that's its main job. That's how it gets paid. That's how I get paid for doing the job.
Oh my God. I mean, it's so funny though, because you can even be aware of the freak out, and you're having the freak out. You're like, I'm not freaking out. I'm not freaking out. I'm totally fine. Yeah, I can be completely relaxed. You're like, well, you could like live in the woods and be, or, I don't know if you've ever had this experience. This is another one too, that I remember I've had it in different points in my life. I wasn't quite ready to release certain things. So it was like when it happened, I'd be like, so it was like, I would be with a friend that, I'm in Mexico. It's like my early 20s, maybe like 20. And I'm super obsessed with my dream at that point in time, like super obsessed.
Yeah.
I must achieve this thing.
And the world will end. Yeah.
The world. Yes. Oh yeah. Hyper like, and I've worked so hard, and I invested so much time, so much of who I was, right? All of these things. It's like, right. And I'm sitting at a lunch, I think, it was one of my first times to Mexico. I was in Cabo, just north, Todos Santos, a really cute, like artistic town that was super simple in northern Mexico. Like, people had like their chickens in the backyard, and it was an artistic little town. They're doing exchange. And I mean, the most charming thing when you're a Western tourist that comes from your big fancy life, right? You love to be charmed by this. But then you're there and somebody's like, well, why don't you just come? Why don't you stay here? You could have like a little studio and work on the farm. And I'm like, why? Because the higher self, so to speak, or the truth of what makes me happy, couldn't think of something that was better. And that freaked me out. Freaked me out. And it was suggested, and I just remember like rejecting it, like, so like, I have a plan.
Right. Well, first of all, my mind's going like, how would I go to Target and get my dry shampoo? Like all those things are whirring through your mind also, through your human, while your higher self's like,
yeah.
That makes me think, Carley, that there's skills work to be done here in this bridge time, in the paradigm shift. But there's so much work to be done, kind of as I touched on earlier, to rewire your nervous system so you are a more grounded, resilient being. Because, well, one, there's just endless stuff out there ready to knock you off your center all the time. This is just it. Change is all there is, people. To think otherwise is insanity. Just let it go. That's all there is. It's evolution or it's death. That's it, right? And the other point I wanted to make with that, and why we need to resource ourselves in such a way that we have the sense of core stability, we're anchored, we're like actually grounded to this earth, is that when we're not there, we can want things all day long, we can practice for things all day long, but when they're given to us or they're offered to us, if we're not ready or capable of holding them and receiving them, that can create a lot of trauma, that can create a lot of stress, that can really send us for a tailspin, or we can not even see that they're being offered to us or available to us despite us wanting them so badly. So the example that you were sharing, which is like someone offered to you the solution, a solution to what you were struggling with, and it was like your being was not ready yet to accept that as even a possibility. And the fact that someone else could see it as a possibility for you was so confronting that it was like a moment of existential crisis there.
Yep.
And destability, like it was destabilizing for you.
Yep.
And
Yep.
now is not the time to be a human that's easily destabilized.
No.
Now is the time to be a human that is like a rock solid core strength, grounded mother of the earth that is unflappable, and not in a way that you're protecting or like letting things bounce off of you, but in a way that you're like, all this stuff is coming in and through, and I'm not attaching to it. I'm not suffering because of it. It's not hurting me. It's not throwing me off my course. So
Exactly.
that, I think, in addition to skills, like some skills to develop are whatever practices will help you restore and find that core stability. Because otherwise, all of the things that are going to emerge for you in the new paradigm, the new ways of seeing things, new possibilities, like Carley just gave the example of, you're not even going to see them. Or if you are confronted by them, like she was sharing, it might just totally throw you off, and then you're untethered and questioning everything.
Yep.
So that I cannot stress that more, how important it is to do that work.
Totally. Yes, I think for in I mean, that is the core of, that is the work, right? Like right? That is all of it. The ability to listen. Hi, booby.
Teddy says hello.
Yes, kitty pie. The ability to listen to what yourself, right? What other voices within yourself are presenting, where stress points are, what your inner truth is, the ability to listen to it outside of yourself. So that would be, in my example, somebody, like you said, gives a possibility and I have a crazy reaction to it.
Yeah.
And that's amazing information, right? When we're triggered in that way, or if we have like that is one of the best indicators that we have of pause.
Mm-hmm.
I need to investigate myself now.
Yes.
And yeah, I could not agree more. And I think we're going to have, it is this concept of thriving in disruption. So what I put out, as it's mastering the transformative self, which means you no longer hold on to a version of yourself or the world that needs to be, in order for you to be able to be present and enjoy and in creation in your life. And it's that toroid, that central axis point, that allows you to thrive.
Mm-hmm.
Take in any information around you and integrate it, and allow the transformation. And also, you're also consciously choosing, you're surrendering to what you cannot control and taking back what you can.
Yeah.
So it's both. It's not just one or the other. It's both. But yeah. Well, I think for today, I think we've been through a good
Yeah.
landed.
I feel complete. I feel like we got to like a natural end point to step one of this conversation that's going to unfold and emerge.
Yeah,
So much clearly to dive into. And, I wrote down a whole bunch of notes that's what I keep referencing over here. I actually have notes
yeah,
that I wanted to share. We didn't get to like a third, or we only got to like maybe a third, maybe a quarter of what I wrote down today. So I have so many other things that I want to bring forward.
Great.
On this topic. It's just
Great.
such a rich field to co-create in with you. So thank you for having me for this conversation, Carley.
Thank you. Thank you for exploring and sharing your wonderful insight in this area. And we'll continue to drill into and now we'll start to get into the new paradigm and the different shifts and what these skills and what this, and really start to play again with these internal, as we talk about the skills and the development of the internal system and how that impacts larger systems as well. So thank you. We will talk soon. Thank you, everybody, to watching, and see you next time.
Bye.